Separation of powers. Now, I looked at this earlier this morning, and yesterday I tuned in at around 6 o'clock to listen to Donald Trump's speech about why he sent the airstrike over to Syria. So this is in Huffington Post and Politics. Trump bombed Syria hours after 88 lawmakers urged him to first consult with Congress. Engaging our military in Syria without prior congressional authorization would violate a separation of powers. The separation of powers, said House Republican and Democrats, both. And so the more, before I even go into this article, the more we hear about what's going on in the White House, there's so much division in the White House. There's so much drama going on, so much firing. And then the people that get fired, they come out of there, and you get like books that Comey came out with. There's a book that he's come out with about Donald Trump, and that is on fire right now. And he's very upset about that book. And there could be a lot of things about that book that are said about him that has him really upset. But there's also the distrust within people that are in that White House. There's been a lot of people who have walked away and decided they didn't want to be a part of it anymore. So serious strikes. Russia warns of consequences in wake of U.S.-led attack over chemical that and it isn't good. So Russia has warned of consequences for the U.S.-led military strikes on its ally Syria, saying the strikes on chemical weapons assets were an insult to Vladimir Putin. And so this article right here, that might be why they wanted him to consult with Congress first. Trigger another major conflict. So in Washington, dozens of House lawmakers on Friday urged President Donald Trump not to take any military action in Syria without first getting authorization from Congress. Engaging our military in Syria when no direct threat to the U.S. exists and without prior congressional authorization would violate the separation of powers that is clearly delineated in the Constitution, and it reads a letter signed by 88 Republican and Democratic members of Congress. We stand ready to consider the fact before us and share the burden of decisions made regarding U.S. involvement in quickly escalating Syrian conflict, the letter has stated. So yet hours later, what do we have? Trump bombed Syria. So I'm going to read this. Again, it's stated We stand ready to consider the facts before us and share the burden of decisions made regarding U.S. involvement in the quickly escalating Syrian conflict, the letter has stated. So, yet hours later, Donald Trump did attack Syria without consulting Congress. The US, the United States, have joined by France and Britain launched attacks against Syrian research, storage, and military targets. Republicans on the letter include reps, and these are all the names: Justin Amish, Thomas Massie, Paul Gosar, Walter Jones, Ted Yoho, Raul Labrador, David Schritzkert. His last name is really, really hard to pronounce for me. So sorry for that. Mia Love, Mark Sanford, Morgan Griffin, Andy Biggs, Jason Lewis, and Mo Brooks, and so on. They have Rod Bloom. And so here's a copy of the full letter, Congress of the United States, Washington, D.C., 20, what does it say? 515, if I'm looking at it correctly, but it's very in small print from here where I'm looking at it. So it was a letter, April 13, 2018, addressed to President Donald Trump, and it reads to him, "Dear Mr. President, we write to you as a bipartisan group of colleagues with a shared concern, as we did with the prior administration in 2013, and again in a letter to you last May. We strongly urge you to consult and receive authorization from Congress before ordering additional use of the U.S. military force in Syria. So your responsibility to do so is prescribed in the Constitution of and the War Powers Resolution of 1973. So while the founders wisely gave the office of the president the authority to act in emergencies, they foresaw the need to ensure public debate and the active engagement of Congress prior to committing U.S. military assets. Engaging our military in Syria when no direct threat to the U.S. exists and without prior congressional authorization would violate the separation of powers that is clearly delineated in the Constitution, and we stand ready to consider the facts before us and share the burden of decision made regarding U.S. involvement in a quickly escalating Syrian conflict." That had me tongue-tied. So, so I guess it's Schwitzkert. So it's David Schwitzkert. So I may not be pronouncing it, but it's listed. All the names are listed of the different people. They're either Democratic or Republican that are in Congress. So there's several names listed. Some of the names that I had sounded off. So in recent days, Trump tweeted about potentially launching the missile strikes on Syrian government in response to President Bashar al-Assad's latest suspected use of chemical weapons on his people. So as the House lawmakers pointed out, Trump may not have the constitutional authority to unilaterally bomb Syria without their sign-off. So lawmakers are constitutionally required to authorize any sustained military action. So for years, President Barack Obama went around Congress to take military action against the self-described Islamic State by saying he could use a sweeping 2001 authorization for the use of military force. So it's abbreviated AUMF. And so we'll hear about what that is, but basically that is use of military force. So it's authorization use of military force is what it's abbreviated. So that AUMF, which has no expiration date, allowed then President George W. Bush to attack anyone connected to Al Qaeda anywhere at any time. So Obama argued that ISIS was an offshoot of Al Qaeda. So he argued he could invoke the same AUMF with this, which is authorization for the use of military force. So Trump can't make the argument for launching missile strikes on Syrian government targets, even if House Speaker Paul Ryan, who is a Republican, says it's fine if he does so. So the administration hasn't even tried to make that case. So when Trump directed the strikes on the Syrian government airbase in April of 2017, the first ever direct military strike by the U.S. against Assad's regime, the administration claimed that the president had the authority under the presidential powers because it was a limited military action, not because of the Iraq War era, which here you have abbreviated AUMF, authorization use of military force. So, but as lawyers at the Nonpartisan Protect Democracy note that U.S. military action in the U.S. military action in Syria is unlikely to be limited to a single engagement. Instead, they say it is likely to lead to a larger and ongoing conflict. So that is the worry that Congress has and other people have, and that's why they wanted him to consult with them first so they could debate on it before they made hasty decisions such as they've done now. And so it sounds a lot more like the beginnings of war than a surgical attack, hence the growing concerns among lawmakers about Trump's next step. So he received plenty of support from the members of his own party Friday night after he announced the attacks. Trump did, but some were unhappy and not being consulted about it. So here's Thomas Macy. He's a Republican, and his comment, or his tweet rather, was, "I haven't read France's or Britain's constitution, but I've read ours, and nowhere in it is presidential authority to strike Syria." Okay, this is from Justin Amish. His statement was, or his tweet rather, was, "These offensive strikes against Syria are unconstitutional, illegal, and reckless. The next Speaker of the House must reclaim congressional war powers as prescribed in Article 1 of the Constitution." So Speaker Ryan has completely abdicated one of his most important responsibilities. So House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, she's a Democrat of California, said one night of U.S. airstrikes would not be a substitute for a clear, comprehensive Syrian strategy, and said that Trump must go to Congress to receive congressional authorization by proposing a comprehensive strategy with clear objectives that keep our military safe and avoid collateral damage to innocent civilians. Collateral damage, you want to know who that is? Regular people, like regular living people, regular people that have nothing to do with what's going on in that White House. Regular innocent people, civilians. And that could be myself included, and anybody that's out there living anywhere in the U.S. You're a regular civilian. You're innocent. You're innocent to this. You have no control over this. But the decisions that are being made in the White House could indicate your livelihood, that we be around or not. And people making hasty decisions could cost a lot of lives as well. So that's pretty self-explanatory. This article is out of Huffington Post. And yep, there's a lot going on. And it doesn't stop there. Right now, we have Russia warning of consequences in wake of the US-led attack over the chemical weapons. Russia is just as big as the US, if not maybe bigger. And so this could be a real ongoing problem. It now is leading into something else. And that doesn't sound good. So it's warned of consequences for the US-led military strikes on the allies Syria, saying the strikes on chemical weapons assets were an insult to Vladimir Putin. That doesn't sound good just hearing it. So I'm not even going to go into this one, but this was on Yahoo, and there's probably multiple articles about this whole decision and where it would lead us as people, as the US. So it doesn't look good at all. In which it felt like we were headed that way, especially when they were talking about spending more money on military weapons and whatnot, and all these cuts on social programs, and all this big interest in military weaponry. And so I feel like it was kind of for giving us a hint that war was in the near future, which is probably in the cards for what's going on right now. Well, you see it here. This is not fake news, and this is real. And there was a letter that was warning him to consult with Congress first, which he didn't. And so now, as a result of that, we'll see how this plays out. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for listening.